It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at the bustling international airport, the kind of day that could easily slip by unnoticed amidst the usual humdrum of security checks, baggage claims, and rushing travelers. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a warm glow through the large windows of the terminal. A steady stream of passengers moved in and out of the gates, their luggage clattering across the polished floors as they navigated the vast space. Travelers exchanged hurried glances, checking their watches or tapping away at their phones, eager to catch their flights or reunite with loved ones. Officer James and his loyal police dog, Rex, made their way through the busy terminal, eyes scanning the crowd for anything that seemed out of place. Rex, a highly trained German shepherd with a sleek black and tan coat, trotted confidently by his side. His job was simple, or so it seemed. He was trained to detect drugs, explosives, and anything else that might pose a threat to the public. James had worked with Rex for over 2 years, and in that time, they'd built an unspoken bond, understanding each other's every move. But today, as the routine shift unfolded, neither of them knew that the calm day would soon take a dramatic turn. The terminal was alive with the usual sounds, the soft announcements over the PA system, the click of high heels on the floor, and the faint hum of the HVAC system. Travelers gathered in clusters, sipping coffee, sorting out paperwork, or just passing the time before their flights. Officer James and Rex moved methodically through the crowd, walking past kiosks, checking luggage, and keeping an eye on the incoming and outgoing passengers. It was easy to forget that behind the calm facade, airports were among the highest risk areas for security threats. James knew this better than anyone, and his alertness never wavered, despite the seeming normality of the surroundings. Rex's movements were smooth, practiced, and his nose never stopped working. The dog's powerful sense of smell allowed him to detect things no one else could. On any given day, the pair might encounter a minor drug bust or perhaps a lost suitcase filled with harmless contraband goods. But today, something felt different. Rex's ears flicked, his eyes scanning more intensely, his head tilting slightly in a way that suggested he was picking up something unusual. They reached the baggage area, where the conveyor belts hummed softly, moving suitcases along in steady streams. Travelers collected their bags with tired eyes, happy to finally be off the planes after long flights. But as Rex walked past the first few bags, something caught his attention. His movements slowed. He sniffed the air, his nose twitching, then he abruptly stopped. His posture shifted, ears alert and eyes fixed on one particular suitcase. It was nothing out of the ordinary. A black, hard-shell suitcase, likely carrying someone's clothes and personal belongings. But to Rex, it was a signal that something wasn't right. Officer James noticed immediately. Rex's change in behavior was impossible to ignore. His tail stopped wagging, and his stance became more rigid. James stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the suitcase Rex had targeted. It wasn't uncommon for Rex to show interest in bags, but this was different. There was a palpable tension in the dog's body, something James had come to recognize as a warning. "Good boy, Rex," Officer James muttered quietly, reaching down to pat Rex's head, but his own gut was telling him something wasn't quite right. Rex had detected something, and James knew better than to ignore it. Rex's focus remained on the suitcase. His breathing was steady, but his body was taut with anticipation. It was as if the dog knew with an unsettling certainty that the bag was hiding something. Something that didn't belong in the terminal. Something dangerous. James exchanged a brief glance with a nearby security officer, signaling to keep an eye on the situation. He stepped closer to Rex, bending slightly to examine the suitcase. It looked perfectly normal, with no signs of tampering or unusual markings. Yet Rex wouldn't let it go. It was as if the dog could smell something the rest of them couldn't. Officer James had learned to trust his partner's instincts without question, and today, those instincts were telling him to investigate further. And so, what had started as a routine morning at the airport was now anything but ordinary. The air in the terminal seemed to thicken as Rex continued to focus on the suitcase. His nose twitched incessantly, and his eyes, usually calm and focused, were now wide and alert, scanning every inch of the bag with unnerving precision. Officer James crouched beside Rex, his hand resting on the dog's back, trying to read the situation. The bag wasn't large, but its weight, shape, and the way Rex was reacting made it clear that something wasn't right. James could feel his own pulse quickening, but he fought to keep his calm. This wasn't the first time Rex had singled out a suspicious item, but it was the first time James had seen him react with this level of intensity. The dog's behavior was different. It wasn't just a casual sniff or a passing interest. Rex was agitated, his body stiff, ears pinned back. He wasn't just picking up a scent, he was sensing a threat. "Easy, boy," James muttered softly, giving Rex a reassuring pat on the head. But Rex wasn't calming down. If anything, the dog seemed more anxious, his focus laser-sharp. Rex took a few slow steps back, then crouched down again, eyes still fixed on the suitcase, his tail rigid and unmoving. James knew better than to ignore Rex's instincts. Over the years, the bond between them had deepened. They were more than just handler and dog. They were partners, working in tandem to protect the public from whatever dangers lurked. But this felt different. "Something's wrong," James said to himself quietly, as he glanced over at the other officers who had begun to gather around. The nearby security personnel, who had been observing from a distance, now seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. The murmurs began to spread, but most people were still unaware of the potential danger unfolding just a few feet away. James stood up slowly, reaching for his radio. He spoke into it with authority, but his voice carried a hint of urgency. "This is Officer James. I need a full inspection of a suspicious suitcase at baggage claim near Carousel 3. Immediate response required." As he spoke, Rex let out a low growl. The sound sent a ripple of unease through the small group of officers that had gathered. James turned to the others, his eyes serious. "Keep the area clear. No one gets too close." A couple of officers moved quickly to form a loose perimeter around the suitcase, watching the crowd, making sure no one wandered too near. Most passengers remained unaware, too focused on their own travel plans to notice the subtle shift in the mood. But for those in the immediate vicinity, the air was thick with tension. Rex's growls grew louder, more insistent, as if he were trying to warn everyone around him. It wasn't just the scent, it was the feeling of impending danger. Something that didn't belong was here, and it was hidden in that suitcase. James felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He could already hear the distant hum of the bomb squad's sirens approaching. But even as he waited for them to arrive, his mind raced. What could it be? Drugs? Contraband? Or something far more dangerous? Rex's reaction was telling him that the stakes were higher than they'd ever been before. The dog's usually steady demeanor had transformed into one of complete vigilance, as though every instinct in his body was screaming that something terrible lay ahead. James took a step back and looked at the suitcase again. It was just an ordinary black bag, but Rex's relentless focus on it was a warning he couldn't ignore. With the bomb squad on the way, James knew that time was running out. He had to act fast, and whatever was inside that suitcase, it was only a matter of minutes before they would find out what kind of threat they were dealing with. Officer James took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed louder than the hum of the terminal around him. Rex was still locked onto the suitcase, his body tense, every muscle primed for action. James looked at his partner's face, searching for any sign that might explain what was happening, but all he saw was pure focus. Rex wasn't just alert, he was on high alert, and that meant something was very wrong. A few more officers arrived, their eyes flicking between the suitcase and Rex, who was still growling softly, almost a constant undercurrent of noise. The tension was palpable, and the air felt heavy, thick with the sense of imminent danger. James felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had worked with Rex long enough to know that the dog didn't react this way unless there was a legitimate threat. "Do you think it's drugs?" One of the officers whispered, glancing nervously at the suitcase. It was a question everyone was silently asking themselves, but no one dared to voice it aloud. Drugs were a frequent find in airports, and though Rex had sniffed them out before, This felt different. I don't know, James muttered, his eyes locked on the suitcase. But whatever it is, it's serious. The bag looked innocent enough at first glance. It was a standard black hard-shell suitcase, a common enough item among the travelers heading to various destinations. But the way Rex was behaving made it anything but ordinary. There was something inside that was causing this reaction, something that Rex could sense, but the rest of them could not yet see. Another officer moved in, slowly, carefully, kneeling beside Rex and trying to calm the dog. "Easy, Rex," the officer said, his voice soft but firm. "We're getting it checked out." But Rex didn't relax. If anything, he seemed even more agitated, pawing at the suitcase and growling in frustration. James could see the worry beginning to spread among the officers. The dog's instincts were flawless, and they knew that something had triggered this response. The question was, what exactly was it? "Have you called for backup?" one of the officers asked, his eyes darting around the busy terminal. People were starting to notice the growing crowd of officers, and a few began to murmur to each other. The usual hum of the airport was interrupted by the quiet tension that had settled in. "Already did," James replied, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Bomb squad's on their way. But I want to get a closer look before they get here." Without waiting for a response, James motioned for one of the other officers to help him carefully move the suitcase away from the conveyor belt, just a few feet back into a quieter corner of the baggage area. He didn't want to draw more attention to the situation than necessary, but he also didn't want to wait any longer. The more they let the situation linger, the more it seemed to escalate. Rex's growls continued, and now the dog was scratching at the zipper of the suitcase, trying to get at whatever was inside. It was almost as if the dog understood that time was running out, that every second wasted was a risk they couldn't afford to take. James carefully reached out, his fingers brushing against the zipper that Rex was clawing at. He paused for a moment, considering whether to open it himself or wait for the bomb squad. But Rex's growing restlessness left him with little choice. Something was inside that suitcase, and whatever it was starting to feel like the real threat wasn't far behind. He glanced at Rex one last time, watching as the dog continued to bark and paw at the bag. "All right, boy," he whispered, more to himself than the dog. "Let's see what's inside." With a final breath, James grabbed the zipper and yanked it open, his eyes scanning the contents as quickly as he could. What he saw inside would leave everyone in the airport stunned and terrified. The zipper of the suitcase gave way with a sudden snap, and James felt his heart race as he peered inside. What he saw made his stomach drop. At first glance, it appeared to be a bundle of clothing wrapped in layers of fabric, tightly packed and secured. But as Rex continued to growl, his agitation escalating with every passing second, James quickly realized there was something far more sinister hiding underneath. He reached in cautiously, pulling back the layers of cloth. What was revealed wasn't just clothes or personal items, it was something far more disturbing. Beneath the fabric, James could make out a large cylindrical shape, wrapped tightly in what looked like several layers of protective plastic and tape. The item was bulky and misshapen, clearly not something that belonged in a suitcase. Rex barked sharply, his voice full of tension and urgency. James didn't need to hear it twice. Whatever this thing was, it was causing Rex to react as if his very life depended on it. The dog's instincts had never been wrong before, and James knew that this discovery could very well be the catalyst for something far more dangerous. Carefully, James lifted the wrapped object, his hands trembling slightly despite his efforts to maintain control. He could feel the weight of it, heavy and unnervingly solid. He adjusted his grip, pulling away more of the cloth, until he saw the unmistakable shape of a container, metallic and dark, almost giving off a faintly ominous glow in the fluorescent light of the terminal. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He turned the object over slowly, trying to make sense of it, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The container had strange markings etched into its surface, symbols that appeared foreign, alien almost. It didn't take a genius to realize that this wasn't some innocent piece of luggage. This was something far more nefarious. "Holy," James whispered, his voice barely audible. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins as the weight of the situation began to hit him. Whatever this was, it was definitely not supposed to be in an airport, let alone in the hands of an unsuspecting traveler. His mind raced. Could it be some kind of illegal chemical? A weapon of some sort? There were no immediate answers, just a gnawing sense of dread that seemed to fill every corner of the terminal. Rex continued to growl, his eyes locked on the container, as if daring anyone to approach it. The dog's instincts were telling him the danger was far from over. And now, the truth of the situation was beginning to dawn on James. They were looking at a potential catastrophe, one that could unfold in seconds if they didn't act fast. He snapped into action, his training kicking in. He motioned for the nearby officers to step back. "Get back. Call in the bomb squad again. We need a full team now." His voice was sharp, demanding attention, and the officers quickly sprang into motion, their faces a mix of confusion and fear as they scrambled to call for reinforcements. The suitcase now lay open, its contents partially exposed, but it was clear that whatever lay beneath the surface was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The terminal, once a bustling hub of travel and excitement, now felt eerily silent. The weight of the discovery hung over them all. Officer James's heart pounded in his chest. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. They were dealing with something far bigger than a routine security check. What had started as a simple inspection had now become a ticking time bomb, and the countdown had already begun. As the officers backed away and the bomb squad made their way into the terminal, James looked down at Rex, whose body was still coiled with tension. The dog had done its job, but the real danger was only just beginning, and James knew that they were running out of time. The discovery sent a wave of panic through the terminal. As the bomb squad's sirens echoed in the distance, a quiet, unsettling murmur spread among the passengers in the baggage claim area. People who had been casually waiting for their bags now stood frozen, eyes wide, glancing nervously at the growing crowd of officers. Some began to whisper, their voices tinged with uncertainty, wondering what was happening, while others simply stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. Officer James stood at the center of the growing chaos, his focus fixed on the suspicious container. His mind raced, trying to process the gravity of the situation. The markings on the metallic container were unlike anything he had ever seen, and despite the protective layers, there was something unmistakable about it. The air was thick with tension, and every passing second felt like an eternity. Rex remained on high alert, his growls growing louder and more persistent. The dog's entire body was rigid, his eyes still locked on the mysterious object, as though he knew, instinctively, that it wasn't just the suitcase that was dangerous. It was the very contents of what lay within. The bond between James and his canine partner was built on trust, and in this moment, James trusted Rex completely. If Rex believed there was danger, then there was no doubt in his mind that they were dealing with something catastrophic. James motioned for a nearby officer to close off the area, creating a perimeter around the suitcase. "No one gets in here," he ordered firmly. "Everyone stay back." The officers immediately began moving to clear the area, pushing bystanders and confused travelers further from the scene. Some passengers, sensing the urgency, started to panic. A few tried to leave the terminal, rushing toward the exits in a hurry, unsure of what was happening, but certain that something was terribly wrong. The atmosphere shifted from one of ordinary travel to one of widespread uncertainty, and the usual hum of the terminal was replaced by whispers, gasps, and hurried footsteps. Within moments, the bomb squad arrived, a team of experts in protective gear, their faces obscured by visors and helmets. The leader of the squad, a seasoned officer named Detective Harris, quickly took charge of the situation. He surveyed the scene with a professional eye, his gaze landing on the exposed container. The tension was evident in his posture, though he maintained a cool, calm demeanor. "Step back," Detective Harris ordered, his voice firm but controlled. "We'll handle it from here." James stepped back, allowing the bomb squad to take over, but his eyes never left the container. The discovery had already thrown the entire airport into lockdown. Security had cordoned off the area, and police officers had begun ushering travelers away from the gates. The terminal, once bustling with activity, now felt eerily deserted. The only sounds were the distant chatter of officers and the soft hum of the airport's fluorescent lights. As the bomb squad worked, the clock was ticking. Every movement they made seemed deliberate, calculated. Detective Harris crouched down next to the container, carefully inspecting the markings in the plastic layers. He spoke quietly into his radio, coordinating with other teams and making sure the right resources were being mobilized. His voice was steady, but there was an underlying urgency in his tone that spoke volumes. Rex, still standing at James's side, let out another low growl. The dog was restless, pacing back and forth as if urging the experts to work faster. James could feel the tension in his partner's every movement. Rex wasn't just reacting to the object. He was sensing the danger that no one else could see yet. The rest of the officers stood in silence, waiting for the bomb squad's next move. The entire airport was on edge, the usual flow of travel disrupted by the uncertainty of what was contained in that suitcase. The public, who had once been oblivious to the dangers lurking in the shadows, now found themselves at the center of a potential crisis. The minutes seemed to drag on, each one adding to the growing sense of unease. James knew the bomb squad had to act quickly. Time was running out. The discovery had already shattered the calm of the terminal, and he wasn't sure if they had the luxury of waiting much longer. Something told him that the real danger had only just begun, and the countdown was ticking louder than ever. Detective Harris' hands moved with practiced precision as he examined the container. His team had begun to set up a series of barriers around the suitcase, ensuring that no one could get too close. The bomb squad was methodical, their movements calm but urgent, aware that every second counted. James stood at a distance, watching the professionals work, but his eyes never strayed from Rex. The dog was restless, pacing back and forth in tight circles, his low growls almost a constant presence in the tense air. The atmosphere in the terminal had shifted completely. What had been an ordinary day of travel was now consumed with fear and uncertainty. The few remaining passengers in the baggage claim area had been herded away, their faces filled with confusion and worry. Some had started to record the scene with their phones, their curiosity piqued by the presence of the bomb squad, though they were too nervous to approach. Detective Harris' voice broke the silence. "We've got to move fast. This could be anything." James nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He had seen his fair share of dangerous situations, but this felt different. The air around him was thick with the unknown. The suitcase, the strange container inside it, and Rex's unwavering reaction all pointed to something far more serious than he had initially anticipated. "We need to secure the perimeter and evacuate the rest of the terminal," Harris ordered, signaling to his team. "Keep everyone back until we have a clearer idea of what we're dealing with." As the bomb squad's experts continued their delicate work, James stepped back, his mind racing. He had a bad feeling in his gut, something that told him this was only the beginning of a far larger problem. The suitcase wasn't just an ordinary piece of luggage. It was a ticking time bomb, a potential threat that could change everything in the blink of an eye. Rex's behavior had been unmistakable, and James had no doubt the dog was picking up on something they couldn't yet understand. Rex had been trained to detect explosives, and his reaction was consistent with a threat of that magnitude. But what kind of explosive could it be? Was it something more sophisticated or just a simple, devastating device? The uncertainty gnawed at him. The bomb squad leader, Harris, crouched down next to the container, his gloved hands carefully peeling back one of the layers of tape that had secured the object. The sound of the tape ripping was deafening in the quiet terminal, and James's breath caught in his throat. He exchanged a quick look with Rex, whose eyes were still fixed on the suitcase, his posture tense. "This isn't good," Harris muttered to himself as he peeled back another layer of plastic. The expression on his face betrayed nothing, but James could sense the gravity of the situation. If the bomb squad was concerned, it meant the risk was much higher than they had hoped. The metallic container now appeared to be some kind of sealed unit, its purpose hidden behind layers of protection. James's mind was a whirlwind of questions. What was inside? Was it a bomb or something else entirely? Could they safely neutralize the threat without triggering whatever mechanism was at play? The bomb squad had advanced equipment, but there were always variables they couldn't yet predict. Suddenly, Rex's ears perked up, and he gave a sharp, low growl, more intense than before. The dog's focus was unwavering. James felt a rush of adrenaline surge through him. The unease in his gut was growing, and with it, a deep sense of urgency. Whatever was inside that container, it was close, too close to ignore any longer. Harris, still focused on the object, paused for a split second, his fingers hovering over the next layer of tape. He spoke without turning around. "Get everyone clear now, if this goes off." But he didn't finish the sentence. The entire team understood. They could all feel the clock ticking. James turned sharply to the officers standing nearby. "Evacuate the rest of the terminal. Now, move everyone away from the gates." As the officers sprang into action, the urgency of the moment weighed heavily on everyone. James took a final glance at Rex, who was now silent, his eyes still locked on the suitcase. The dog's body was taut, as though he knew the final moment was fast approaching. The bomb squad worked feverishly, and with every passing second, it felt like they were getting closer to the truth, or closer to something that could end everything. Time was running out, and no one knew exactly what would happen next. The terminal had transformed into a scene of chaos. The once bustling airport, filled with travelers going about their business, was now a ghost town. Officers moved quickly, guiding the remaining passengers toward the exits, while others formed tight perimeters around the bomb squad's operation. Tension filled the air, and even the most seasoned officers couldn't hide the anxiety in their eyes. Every second that passed seemed to make the situation feel more dangerous, more uncertain. James stood with Rex, watching as the bomb squad worked, and the reality of the moment started to sink in. The metallic container was still there, sitting ominously on the floor, surrounded by the bomb squad's team. Harris and his colleagues were carefully dismantling the layers of tape and plastic with a level of caution that spoke volumes about the risk they were facing. Every move they made was deliberate, but the quiet hum of their equipment only served to heighten the suspense. James felt a lump form in his throat. It wasn't just the fear of what might be inside. It was the growing realization that the team might not be able to disarm whatever threat they were dealing with. If this was a bomb, if it was something worse, they might be running out of time faster than they could manage. Rex had been silent for a while, but the dog's intense focus on the container never wavered. The bond between them was undeniable, and in that moment, James trusted his partner's instincts more than anything else. Rex had sensed danger from the start, and it was clear now that the dog's warnings were not to be taken lightly. Then something changed. The bomb squad leader, Harris, paused, his gloved hands trembling ever so slightly. James's breath hitched as he watched Harris look up from the container, his eyes meeting James in a brief, silent exchange. It was enough. James could see it in the detective's expression, the worry, the uncertainty, the realization that they were dangerously close to the edge of a major disaster. "We need to clear the area," now Harris said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. His words sent a ripple of movement through the officers, who quickly took their positions to create a tighter perimeter. Harris turned back to the container, his face grim. James stepped closer to Rex, who remained still but alert, his eyes never leaving the suitcase. There was a sudden, uneasy silence as Harris and his team examined the object, and the tension felt almost unbearable. Then Harris spoke again, his voice low but unmistakable. "This is not just a bomb," he said, looking over at James with a look of disbelief. "It's something else. It's rigged to explode on a timer, but it's designed to trigger a secondary device, something that we haven't even uncovered yet." The words hit James like a punch to the stomach. A secondary device. The situation was worse than they had feared. Whatever was inside the container had been specifically designed to cause more destruction, maybe even more loss of life. It wasn't just about stopping a single threat now. They were facing something far more complex and insidious. James's mind raced. If it wasn't a simple explosive, then what was it? How many people could be at risk if this failed? Detective Harris gave a sharp nod, clearly formulating a plan. We need to contain this quickly. We can't take any chances. Get the bomb squad robot in here. Officers scrambled to position the remote-controlled bomb robot, its metallic arms extending slowly toward the suitcase. The quiet whir of the robot's movements filled the space, a stark contrast to the tension that had settled over the group. James's heart pounded in his chest as the robot made its way to the object, its camera scanning for any signs of further danger. Rex let out a low, almost imperceptible whine, his anxiety now palpable. James patted his side, trying to offer some comfort to his partner. "We'll get through this, boy," he muttered, even though part of him wasn't sure if that was true. The final moments before the bomb squad made their move seemed to stretch on forever. The weight of the discovery, the secondary device, the careful work of disarming it, felt like an impossible task. And yet the team was moving quickly, knowing that with each passing second, they were coming closer to an answer. The problem was, they had no idea how much closer they were to disaster. As the robot positioned itself over the suitcase, the countdown to something irreversible began. Would they disarm the device in time, or was it already too late? James stood frozen, watching as everything in the terminal depended on one final life-or-death decision. The terminal had fallen into a heavy silence as the bomb squad robot, an advanced piece of technology designed for situations like this, moved slowly but methodically toward the suitcase. Its camera zoomed in on the suspicious container, relaying data back to the team of experts who were working under immense pressure. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every officer and agent held their breath, watching the robot inch closer to the ticking time bomb, or whatever it was. James stood at the edge of the periphery, Rex beside him, his body stiff with anxiety. The dog was alert, his eyes never leaving the suitcase, his every muscle taut with anticipation. James's grip on his own emotions was tight, but inside, his thoughts were spiraling. He had worked in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just about catching criminals or solving a case. It was about saving lives, including his own, Rex's, and everyone else in the terminal. The robot's mechanical arms moved with precision, cutting through layers of protective tape and plastic. Harris, the bomb squad leader, spoke in low tones to his team, giving quick, deliberate instructions. His focus never wavered, but James could see the strain in his eyes. They were running out of time. "We're close," Harris muttered, more to himself than anyone else, as the robot began to peel back the final layers of the strange container. The entire bomb squad team had their eyes fixed on the monitor, watching as the robot's sensors scanned for any indication of a hidden trigger or deadly mechanism. Every member of the squad knew that even the slightest mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. As the last piece of plastic was lifted away, the object inside the container became fully visible. It was large, cylindrical, and metallic, obviously designed to be concealed in a way that made it difficult to identify or neutralize quickly. The markings on the surface were even more intricate now, and they pulsed with an ominous energy. Harris narrowed his eyes, his fingers hovering over the controls of the robot. "This is bad," he said quietly. "This isn't just a standard explosive." James's heart sank. He had feared something more was at play, but to hear Harris, the seasoned bomb expert, admit it aloud confirmed his worst fears. The object inside the suitcase had been designed to cause far more damage than any ordinary bomb. A secondary device, perhaps a chemical agent, or something even worse, was almost certainly involved. Rex barked once, a sharp, urgent sound that cut through the tense silence. The dog's growl followed, low and steady, as he stared unflinchingly at the suitcase. James was struck by the intensity of Rex's reaction. The dog seemed to sense something was terribly wrong, something that everyone else was only beginning to understand. Harris leaned in closer to the robot's screen, his eyes scanning the readout. "We've got two potential threats here. There's a timer on the device, but it's also rigged to release a gas if disturbed too much," he said, his voice tense. "If we don't deactivate this carefully, We'll have a disaster on our hands. The bomb squad team worked in perfect synchronization, their movements precise and calm despite the enormous pressure they were under. The clock was ticking, and every second mattered. The robot's arm was now delicately trying to disarm the timer, a task that was more intricate than any of them had anticipated. The smallest jolt could trigger the secondary device. James felt like his heart was pounding in his throat. Everything was hanging in the balance now, and they were perilously close to the point of no return. Rex barked again, and this time James could feel the dog's unease in his bones. The air felt thick, charged with a sense of impending disaster. The final moments were upon them. The bomb squad had done everything they could, but as the timer on the device clicked down to the final seconds, there was no way to tell what would happen. Would they succeed? Or would this moment end in a disaster that could take out the entire terminal? James held his breath, waiting for the inevitable. The silence in the terminal was deafening. Then suddenly, there was a loud, sharp click. The timer stopped. The room exhaled in unison. The bomb squad leader, Harris, let out a slow, relieved breath. "It's done," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're safe." The threat had been neutralized, and though the danger had passed, the shock of what they had just encountered still hung in the air. James looked down at Rex, who was finally relaxing, his body language softening. The dog had done his job. The tension that had gripped them all for what felt like an eternity slowly began to ebb away. But even as the immediate threat had been eliminated, one thing was certain: what had just happened at the airport was only the beginning. The mystery of who had planted the device and why was still unresolved, and there was no telling what else lay ahead. The truth was far from over.